All right. So let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, my name is Shawn O'Neill. This is a summer breeze. Our topic today is certification requirements for International Tutor Training Program certification. Uh, I'm really excited to be with you all today. I mentioned to some of the group while we were kind of coming in today, this has been a 5-year process. So from working with our stakeholders, getting feedback from our reviewers, from our certified programs, from experts in the field, doing literature reviews, we've been just working on this tirelessly for a long time. So we'll talk a little bit today about some of the things that we've changed in the last few months, and then some of the things that are staying the same. We'll have opportunity for questions as we go along, and like I said, we'll do a couple of activities. So our agenda today, we are going to talk about the structure and fees for certification. We're going to break down the 4 criteria or the requirements for certification. We'll talk a little tiny bit about the application process. We do have another Summer Breeze session that is just application. So if you have really specific questions about the application process, I encourage you to come to that session. We do have a couple of seats left open. Then we're going to talk about some tips and tricks, and then we'll have some questions from you all to me, and I also have some questions for you all. I do have to do my salesman pitch today and talk a little bit about why you should do certification. So the reason that certification is definitely something that you should seek or you should continue. It is cost effective. So we review your program. We then determine whether your program is meeting our requirements, and we issue you a certificate. So our fees are based on the application itself, not on the size of your program or the number of tutors you have working for you. And it's a pretty reasonable fee. We'll talk about that in a second. It also helps to elevate your program. It increases recognition for your program and credibility. It's always been really helpful to me to be able to say to a faculty member, you should send your students to my center because our tutors know what they're doing. And look, we're part of an international certification. One of the big things that also documents your program and initiatives, and it makes you, I don't want to say makes you, but it makes you do that on a regular basis. You know, we mentioned earlier, I'm swamped with work right now. It seems like there's always something going on. And because I know that my CRLA certification comes up regularly, it kind of gives me that time to sit down and go, let me document what's going on here, how I do this and what I do. So it's kind of like climbing out of the trenches to actually say what we're doing in the trenches. And that way, if I ever get hit by a bus or I leave my position, there's breadcrumbs for the person that replaces me. We have set guidelines. It's a pathway for continued development, recognizes that experience and training, also provides opportunities to learn best practices and also to contribute to the field. In the purple box here, we've just got it's endorsed by CLADIA, the Council for Learning Assistance and Developmental Education
There we go.
Associations. Yep. Which is an organization of organizations that gets together regularly and helps guide the field. We've also been around for a really long time. So CRLA certification began in the 1980s and it's still going strong. And it started on really the backs of giants. So a lot of the seminal work in the field went into creating what was the initial certification requirements. We also do not require you to be a CRLA member to be a certified program. So if you, for example, are a member of NCLCA or any of those other organizations, you don't have to also join CRLA, though you should because CRLA is awesome, but you don't have to. All right, so let's go into what I'm going to turn off my sales pitch voice and talk about certification. We have 3 levels of certification that are available. So the first level is essentially the basics of tutoring. The second level is the psychosocial components of tutoring. And the third level is more management or leadership. You do not have to seek all 3 levels, but they are sequential. So in order to get to level 2, you have to have a level 1 program and so on. The reason I do want to make sure I point out that not all programs need to be certified at all 3 levels is because you really can pick what meets the needs of your institution. For example, a lot of our 2-year colleges or community college systems have a hard time keeping tutors for a long time because they're they get their associates and they go on to university, or they go into the workforce. So it may not make sense for you to have all 3 levels at your institution. It's just based on your program and your program needs. And as you go through the process, your initial certification is valid for a certain amount of time. We'll talk more about that. It's changed recently. And then you'll renew your certification on a regular basis. And that allows your program to adjust, to grow, to change based on what's going on in the specific cultural context or campus community, while still meeting the requirements overall. I did say we would talk briefly about fees, so I'll make sure to bring those up here too. The application fee schedule for 1 level, it's $150. For 2 levels, it's $250. For 3 levels, it's $350. So if you do more than 1 level at a time, you get a little bit of a price break. We also have a multiple campus or multiple program discount. So if you have multiple programs that all want to come together and do your training as one, we allow you to do that, and we give you a little bit of a price discount for that, since you're collaborating with your colleagues.
Hello, Shawn. My name
Yeah.
is Vernita Emerson. I
Hey,
am
Vernita, I
the
recognize your name.
assistant. Great. I'm the assistant director and learning skills specialist at the Center for Academic Resources and Enrichment Services at the University of Kentucky. And we have been certified levels 1 and 2.
Mhm.
And we're getting ready to recertify for both of those. So let's just say we are already certified levels 1 and 2, and we decide that we want to add level 3, do we have to fill out the application for all 3, or how does that work? Or is that something you can answer today?
That is something I can answer today. We actually made a little bit of a change, and that's why you may have seen like a kind of question face on my face. Um, so now, anytime you want to add a level, you will do a new certification application, which will make sure that all of your levels sync. So you'll have one renewal deadline for all 3. And it also makes sure that your program is one unit rather than being separated by these different applications. And that's a really great segue to my next slide, um, and some of the changes that we've made. So as you can see here in the new system, basically we've gotten rid of the stages, and we have a new certification or renewal. So anything you're doing new, you do this one. Anything you're doing that's a renewal, you do this one. So for your specific instance, if you wanted to add level 3, we would ask you to complete this new certification with all 3 levels. And since you're kind of coming over from the old system into this new system, we would adjust to cover that gap in time. So if you still have a couple years left on 1 and 2, we would adjust that time to get you in line. So you wouldn't lose out on any time. And I'll let other people ask questions if they have them. But the reason that we made this change is to make it easier for the programs to see your whole program at one time. So the reviewers can give you feedback and can help you to make sure that everything lines up and there's a big picture overview. We also did this because we had a lot of programs that were struggling with having multiple applications all due at the same time, and like figuring out like when to do which application. So now it's just one simple rule.
So Shawn, the way I'm looking at this slide, if we are currently certified as a stage 3 program, we're currently under a 5-year certificate, but when we recertify, will it be just a 4-year certificate?
Yes. So essentially, if you are currently a stage 3 program, when you renew, you will do the renewal application. And
Right.
that will produce a 4-year certificate. And then it will
Okay.
be every 4 years thereafter.
Okay. Thanks.
Mhm. And that actually came as feedback from our stakeholders from our certified programs, the ones that we worked with on this change, because what we discovered is that in the old system, 1 year was not long enough. Folks were saying they barely had time to run through their program and they're already renewing. And they also told us that 5 years was a little bit too long because people would leave the position right around the 3 to 4 year mark, and the new person would just be coming in and be renewing. And so what we tried to do was to adjust it to where it gave you a little bit more time on the front end and not so much time on the back end, so that you would have that continuity of application.
Actually, I have a question. So, and this might just be a little bit more detailed. So if we are in, I want to say we're in stage 2, the 3-year reflection and renewal,
Mhm.
but we want to also add in level 2. So that would be a new application.
Yep.
So I'm assuming that we are just going to do a complete resubmit of level 1 and level 2 application so that we start at the same time. Is that appropriate?
Yep. Your explanation makes perfect sense.
Okay.
So anytime you are doing anything new, meaning if you are adding a level, if you are adding a program, or you're adding a campus, you're going to do that to your certificate application. I did sit down with a pen, a piece of paper, and a calculator and figured out, does this save time? Does it save money? What does it do for our applicants? And for the program that I looked at, they were looking to do kind of what you were describing. They had a level 1, they wanted to add a level 2. By doing it in this new way, it costs exactly the same amount of money, but it's 2 fewer applications over that time. So it saves you those hours of doing the application. Okay, so I do want to talk a little bit more about the levels, since we've had some questions about adding levels and that sort of thing. So here's the information I have on the slide about levels. Basically, you can conceptualize the levels as having to do with the depth of your program. So a level 1 program covers the basics. How do I do my job? What is a tutor? What does tutoring look like? What are some good ways of interacting with my students and helping them reach their goals? As we get into the more advanced levels, we start adding in a lot more detail. And so you'll start seeing that the topics are going to get a lot more specific, and they're going to focus on slightly different elements. Again, if you don't have a program that needs to have a level 3, you don't have to have it, but you're welcome to it. At my institution, we figured that it would be better to go to level 3 because we kept our tutors for a long time. So our tutors, they stay on staff from usually their sophomore to this first semester of their senior year. And so this gives us a way of developing them over time. So let's do a certification rundown. I mentioned that there are some criteria. We call them the 4 criteria. And can you all see my slides? Wonderful. As you all know on Zoom, it's hard to tell who can see what. Okay, so the 4 criteria are hiring, training, experience, and evaluation. And one of the changes that we made this runaround this time is we've changed it from hiring to selection. So you do not need to be in charge of hiring your tutors to train them. You just need to make sure that you're meeting the selection criteria. So if you're thinking about if you have volunteer tutors, that's fine. If you are trying to do like a training center, there are ways that you can do that. It's a little bit, talk to me about it, but it doesn't have to necessarily be hiring. What we're looking for in that criteria is that it includes an interview. And during that interview, you are explaining the essential functions of the job. So what it is that the candidate will be doing in their work with you. We also expect that there is a recommendation that comes from, it says knowledgeable other here, that's my language. The way that it's worded in the requirements is that it has to be a faculty member, an instructor, dean, department head, or other content specialist. So the idea being that if you are trying to hire a biology tutor, I am not a biology expert. So I want to go to somebody who knows something about this subject area to get them to tell me, yes, this candidate can speak confidently about this subject area. They can work with their peers around this subject area. What that recommendation looks like, it doesn't have to be a letter. It could be a phone call that you track on a log. It could be a Google form that you have your instructors fill out. It could be a piece of paper that you ask the candidates to bring to their faculty and bring back to you. It could be a lot of different things. The things that we're encouraging you to ask about is, again, can they speak knowledgeably and comfortably about the subject area? Do you think they would make a good tutor for your department or your content area? Those sorts of things to help encourage buy-in from your faculty that they have some say in this process. If you yourself are a content expert, you can also recommend folks to be hired or selected to tutor for your department. So if you run a writing center or a speaking center and you are a writing specialist and a faculty member in the English department, there are situations where that could happen. They're rare, but that could be something. Ashley asked a question, does the interview have to be structured in a specific way? It does not have to be structured in a specific way. And we actually have one of our examples in the standards and outcomes publication that I'll share with you all later. It gives you several different options for how you might conduct your interview. As long as that essential functions of the job piece is there, it doesn't have to be a particular format. Amy Cook, you asked the question, what about professional tutors? Yeah, so if they have equivalent experience, that could fulfill the A or B in the subject area, but we still encourage them to talk with a faculty member at your institution to get that faculty buy-in. So do you need a recommendation from every area that they tutor in? Yes. So if they're going to be tutoring in biology and chemistry, then we want recommendations from somebody who does biology and someone who does chemistry. I will get there, Deb. We're going item number 1 and we'll go down. Okay, so that's the hiring requirements. Now I'm going to get into training. And we'll go into this in a little bit more detail because this is the biggest part. So we ask for 10 hours of training per level. You have to track attendance, meaning that you know which tutors went and which tutors didn't. Not just that they went to a training session, but what training they went to, because you have to verify that they've gotten the right number of topics. And you also need to verify that they have at least 5 hours of time spent TIS, which is tutor trainer led, interactive, and synchronous. So tutor trainer led means that it is led by a person designated as a trainer. That trainer could be a professional, for example, you, or a program admin. It could be also someone that you have trained to train and that you oversee in the process of training. I'm actually putting together a certifications corner post specifically about what does it mean to be a trainer. So if you have further questions about what's a trainer, what's a trainer, we can definitely talk about that. I just want you to think about like who's going to be the person training. They have to be involved in leading the session. It has to be interactive, meaning that the staff is not just sitting there listening or staring off into space. And synchronous, it has to happen at the same time. And the purpose of that is that we want the trainees to feel, number one, that you value the time and that training is important to you, that they are seeing reflected in your program exactly the skills that you want them to be using in their sessions. And we also want them to get just-in-time feedback. So if they're practicing something in training, we want them to get feedback about how it's going. All right. Lauren asked, could a trainer be a level 2 or level 3 tutor? Lauren, if they are a level 3 tutor, they can technically be a trainer because training on training is a level 3 topic. So we just ask that level 2 tutors not be just because there's a weird power dynamic there. If they've just gotten their level 2, they're not that far removed from the folks that they would be training. It gets a little bit sticky. All right, can we blend face-to-face in Zoom? Absolutely. So we did our training all on Zoom this semester, and that's perfectly fine because it is trainer-led. It can be interactive if you've designed it that way, and it's synchronous. We also ask training to include some type of assessment, and for every single ITTPC topic, we have some examples of how you might assess it. So that's we'll talk about that when I pull up that document. Tutor says, if a trainer is a faculty with substantial teaching experience and gone through the summer training, the Summer Institute, it sounds like it, as long as they've also been trained on your specific training protocols. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about training. We'll come back to that slide in just a second. So with training, we ask the tutors attend a core set of training topics. So we give you a selection, and I'll show you the list of topics for level 1, but we'll give you a list of topics. And each of the topics that you select that are ITTPC topics, you need to cover for at least 30 minutes. And if you do the math, we ask you to have 10 topics that are ITTPC topics, and you cover those topics for at least 30 minutes. So if you do the bare minimum, that is 5 hours. The other 5 of which you can do other things with. You can also say, you know what, these ITTPC topics are really important to us and we want to hit them really hard. We're going to cover them for more time. So 30 minutes is the bare minimum, but you can always do more. We ask that the tutors be required to attend, well, required is a weird word, that the tutors be given the opportunity to attend training tasks for at least 10 hours. You can always do more. So for example, at level 1 at my institution, it's actually a 13-hour training program. So we have an additional 3 hours, and we use those 3 hours to do some interesting stuff. So we have them do like a little capstone project and, you know, that sort of thing. And Sienna, I think it's Sienna, we'll talk a little bit more about the topics and how you can choose from them. There are opportunities for you to choose any topics in a certain way. So I'll show you that. We'll talk about that in more depth in a second. There's that piece about assessment and reflection, both throughout training and after. There is no requirement that they must be completely trained before they start working. So you can do your tutor orientation and whatever you think is important to get them started, then have them start tutoring and do training concurrent with that if it makes sense for your institution. So I know sometimes folks ask, how can you structure your program? There's lots of ways to do it. And I actually have found that there are as many ways to structure your training program as there are training programs. It's one of the things I've reviewed like 500 programs or something. And I'm just like, wow, that's yet another way it could be done. Cool. That's something I really love about CRLA. And the reason that I got so involved in this is because you can design your training program to fit your institutional need. It has flexibility in it for that purpose. The other thing that we ask about training is that the tutors need to complete all of the requirements for one level before moving to the next. So if we look at the 4 criteria, until the tutor has met all 4 of these areas, they have not completed training because the experience is part of the certification process. The evaluation is part of the process, which is why we look at all 4 of these areas. Okay, so I said I was going to talk more about the topics, and to do that, I actually have a document for you all. Anyone here, just by kind of a show of hands, has anyone here looked at the Standards, Outcomes, and Assessments publication that we put out? It was just published this past May. Some yeses, some nos. Okay. I have the link here in the chat. I'm going to put it in the chat. what I will tell you before you click on it, it is 114 pages long. So if you are not on a device that can download a 114-page document, do not click the link that I am putting in the chat right now. Okay? One of my reviewers emailed and was like, oh my God, I tried to download this on my phone. It was an accident. It was an accident. It was going to be shorter, but then I just couldn't stop. Once I got going, it just got longer and longer. So let me pull this up because I want to show some stuff to you in this document. And you can find this on the CRLA website. It's under certification, ITTPC, and requirements, and it's listed under the training topic. That sounded confusing. You should be able to find it though. And if you can't, you can always email it. All right, so let me share this real quick. Oh yeah, you just started looking at them, Sarah? Yeah, it's pretty intense. And we designed this to be as much help as we could give. All right, so y'all seeing it in front of you now? Wonderful. So I'm just going to do a little bit of scrolling around in here. I will show you the table of contents. So you can see here, it's got an overview, requirements overview with all of the 4 areas. And if you go in here, I'm just going to look at training first. It talks about what the requirements are very, very briefly, what we're looking for here, and then a little bit about differentiating between the levels. So it goes in a pretty significant detail as we go along. And so this is level 1. And in all of the levels, there are 5 categories. So the 5 categories are basics, communication, learning and study techniques, ethics and equity, and electives. And so we ask that as a certified program, you have a certain number of these topics that you have to cover. In the old system, we used to just give you a list of 15 topics and say, pick 8. In the new system, we've given you a list of mumbledy topics, and we've asked you to pick 10. And we did that there's lots of different reasons why we did that. But what we did is we wanted to make sure that training programs were well-rounded, that they weren't just picking, the 8 topics at the top of the list, that they were actually thinking through what skills a tutor needs in order to be effective. So we've implemented this as a way to help you to do that. And as we look at this list, in the basics category, you're going to do all 4 topics. Communication, you can pick 2. In learning and study techniques, you pick 2. Ethics and equity, you pick at least 1. And then in electives, you pick at least 1. And that's your 10 total topics. You can always do more. And this is what I was talking, I forget who it was. Was it Sienna, I think? About, for the other topics, can you pick whatever you want? The electives category is very general. So you'll see you can choose something about institutional policies or problem solving or practical applications of research or a substitution or an other where you just pick another topic. So you have lots of opportunity in this category to do all sorts of things. And you can also pick more topics from each of these than the minimum. All right, so this is a learning and study skills topic. So when I go there, of course, it had to be one on a split page. It's okay.
Sorry.
How would you know? I didn't even know. It will give you the standard. And we do have another summer breeze where we're just going to talk about what is a standard and how is it different from an outcome. And it is described in here as well. So the standard is the tutor understands the value of graphic organizers in the learning environment and knows ways to represent information as a graphic, mind map, chart, diagram, image, visual note taking, etc., to aid in the study process. So that's what the tutor knows. Then the next section is the outcome. So the tutor can identify and model several types of graphic organizers, explain their intended purposes, and can provide students with a demonstration of how to use the tool as an effective study technique. So when we're looking at your program, we're actually looking at, have you designed a program that is going to allow your tutors to do that? And so I see the question that Kelly has answered. You know, our program already has FERPA, already has Title IX, as long as it's meeting these standards and outcomes. So if it's just a general, like, you know, watch this video and we check off a box, you could use that as part of your training and then add a piece that links it back to the tutor standard. Because tutor training is about training them as tutors. So maybe you have a discussion where you sit down and say, okay, now that you've talked about or learned about FERPA in a general sense, how does that impact you as a tutor? What sort of information might you get in a tutoring session that we want to be extra careful to make sure that we don't share out? Or what do you do in this kind of situation that might occur in your training or in your tutor sessions? So thinking about that, as long as you can have that piece that links it back to them as the specific entity that they are, which is tutors, then you can count that as part of your requirements. So that is actually a really great question. And it is one of the reasons why this topic is in ethics and equity at level 1. All right, Deb also said learning theories and academic support. So you've asked, is there any kind of information? That is a great question to ask, Deb, because the other thing that we've done with our new publication that's different from the old publication, if I scroll all the way down to the bottom, let me just pause it so I'm not scrolling while I'm talking. One of the things that we did on this update that we didn't have before is we have actually put together a bibliography that has little annotations about that information. So if you go to, this is just the stuff on the general, like tutoring, tutor training. But if you scroll down a little bit, we have sections on basics. So when I want to train my tutors on the basics, where can I go to get more information that will help me to design that training? And we have actual little descriptions of what you can find in each of these places, so to help you make some instructional decisions. Yeah, absolutely. Deb, you can absolutely, for your own bibliography, yeah, use this format if you like. If you love it, use it. We don't require a specific format for your own bibliographies, but if you like this format, steal it. Mm-hmm. All right, so that is a little bit about the training component. There are some other things in this document that might help you as you're developing your trainings. So we have some sample lesson plan templates. We have how to design your own outcomes. So if you're thinking of creating your own training sessions, we've got some resources in here to help you with that. We also have a checklist, a certification checklist, which is Appendix I, if you want to zoom ahead to that section, that goes through all the different components and you can kind of check yes, no, and figure out where you are right now versus where you want to be. So we've got lots and lots of resources in here. And this was one of the things that actually took us the longest, was putting together all of the appendices. Because we wanted to make sure that if you're new to this role or new to training your tutors, you had more information other than just a list of topics. All right. So you've been asking questions as we went along, which is great. All right. So Kendra says, new information was just published. We will not have examples of how we have done. Yes. So Kendra, that is a really great question. So you've asked, like, we are making this shift to the new system. How do we handle that? I would begin by first seeing actually how much you have to change. So I went through this myself with my own program. So we designed this, I've tried to design it to where it's agnostic, right? It's not based on my program. After we started doing this, I revised my program. We had to add one topic. One of my colleagues did the same thing, and she didn't have to do a whole lot of change either. because we didn't really change the topics, more we just made them more specific and we put them into a structure. So you may not have to do as much change as you might think. So the first thing I always recommend folks to do is look at that checklist in Appendix I and see what actually you need to change. And if it's just a couple of things, like you need to add a couple sessions or you need to change this one little thing, you can go ahead and say, here's what we've been doing and here's our documentation of what we've been doing. And also we're making this little change. And there's a section on the new application that asks you what is changing or what has changed. So you'll have the opportunity to document that in that way. Kendra, does that kind of allay some of that anxiety? Okay, good. I also made this quick overview. You can make a copy of it to download of just all of the certification criteria. Want to make sure I gave that to y'all before I forgot again. All right, so we talked about training. There is a really great book. It is in the bibliography and it's called Active Training. You'll find it in the bib. If you are new to training, obviously come to the CRLA conference. We'll help you with that. We're doing some sessions on training. You can also come to the Summer Institute next summer that we're doing in St. Louis if you want to know more about training. But in the meantime, really great book called Active Training. It is not designed for higher ed. It's designed for like the training world, the corporate training world, but I use it literally every day. It is a great resource and I don't mind pointing people to it. All right, so experience, 25 hours of direct experience for each level. That time is tracked and aggregated and it is non-cumulative. So what we mean by that, if I am a level 1 tutor and I tutor for 100 hours in my first semester, 10 hours of tutoring for 10 weeks, I have 100 hours of tutoring. Next semester, I start level 2. The clock starts over. I need an additional 25 hours of experience. Because the experience is the opportunity for the trainee to practice the skills that they are learning in training. Danielle, you are a godsend. Thank you. Yes, that is exactly the book that I'm talking about.
No problem.
All right. You're like me when I'm in a training. I'm like, oh, I can Google that.
I have it. It's a good book.
Yeah, it's like what, 25 bucks, something like that. Maybe a little bit more. I purchased it. I was like, why am I buying this book? It's a little expensive, but literally I use it every day. Oh, I didn't talk about this. Oh, let me talk about this really quick. One of the changes that we made to the synchronous training, the TIS requirement, we've just made it 5 hours for each level. It used to be this weird like 642 thing. We just equalized it to 5 hours. One, to make it easier to tell what you're doing. Two, for those reasons I described before, like we want our tutors to know that we think that this experience is valuable and that we are in it with them, that we are developing them as tutors, not having them do a project and then never following up on it. Not that any of us would do that, but we just wanted to make it clear how much we value that interaction. Tutoring is an interactive experience, training should be too. All right, so to talk about the experience piece, I mentioned 25 hours. It can be concurrent with training or immediately after. So if you wanted to do a training retreat, some folks do that, where they get all their tutors together and they, take 2 days or a day and they do this big retreat and then they go and they start tutoring. You can do that. You can also, have them do an orientation and then do their training concurrent with their experience. But it does need to be actual tutoring experience. So with this, you can't say, oh, they watched a person tutoring, and that's as good as tutoring, because it isn't. However, you could have, as part of a training exercise, have one of your tutors observe another tutor, take some notes, and then come back to training and talk about it. It just doesn't count as experience. We ask that you have some way that the tutors can document their time. So we used to have this really weird 80% rule. Is anybody here familiar with it? Okay, good. You can forget about it. We got rid of it. It was weird. Yeah, it was real weird. So one of the things that we decided as a group was that that weird thing didn't make any sense. It worked for some programs, it didn't work for others. So what the new guideline is, if you have a drop-in center or a lab style tutoring center where maybe you have students come in, they sit at tables, your tutors are up and kind of cycling around the room, working with students in small groups or individually, as long as you have a way of documenting how much time they're spending with students, that is all we want to know. So there are lots of ways that you can do that. For example, you could have your tutors who just record who they work with. You could have the students sign in and then sign out and say who they worked with, and you know, and that might count for that time. It depends on how your center is structured, but as long as you have a way of documenting that time fairly and consistently, that's all that we ask. So you don't have to do math more than just adding up their hours. All right, any questions about experience?
Shawn, I had a question about the like starting over each semester. If a tutor is like hired later in the semester, or they're working with a subject that's not as popular, sometimes our tutor would only accumulate 20 hours per like in one semester, and so they wouldn't finish their level 1 certification. Could they take those hours to their second semester and to finish their level 1 certification, or would they have to start over?
Yeah, they can take it with them.
Okay,
So
it's just once they reach level 1, then they need to start their count over.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So we don't have a timeline on how long training takes. The most common thing that we see is a semester-based system. So it takes one semester to get through the training requirements, and then you move to the next level, or you complete and you're done. But we don't have that requirement. So if it takes some tutors a little bit longer to get all the requirements in, that's fine. If you want to design your training program to take a full year, you can do that. And there are programs that do that. There are also some programs that, because they're on the quarter system, they do things a lot differently. And that's okay, as long as you're making sure that all the requirements are being met. So one of the things that we had to do at my center, when we started thinking about this experience clock thing, is, you know, at the start of a new semester, we start all our numbers over again, right? So how do we know how many hours of tutoring so-and-so had last semester? So we had to start keeping a separate document that just tracked their experience hours over time. And then when they finished the level, we put a mark in the system and said they finished that level, and the clock starts over on this date. So we did have to do things a little bit differently because our tutors have a full year to finish all the requirements. So I want to go to the very last item on our little chart, which was evaluation. Now, when we say evaluation, what do we mean? So we just recognize there are lots of ways to evaluate. Yeah, observing tutors, giving feedback, recordings. So the requirement, there are lots of ways of doing evaluation. The purpose of the evaluation, just as was identified here, is to link back to the training and the experience and to help push the tutor forward in their development. So the evaluation has a specific purpose. You can tie other pieces of evaluation, like evaluating other things. You can definitely tie this to that, but you also want to make sure you're meeting that need as well. So for example, someone said student surveys. You can collect student survey data. It's a great idea. Are your students satisfied with the experience that they're getting at your center? Are your tutors feeling like they're getting a good product? So on and so on. That in and of itself is not enough to meet the evaluation requirement. Still a good idea, not enough, because the student doesn't know what good tutoring looks like. They may have a sense of what they think good tutoring looks like, but they're not privy to what you have trained your tutors to do. And I'm sure you have all had a situation where a student says, the tutor won't answer my homework questions. They're a terrible tutor. When you're like, no, I trained my staff to not answer that question. So on its own, oh yeah, they might have very wrong ideas of what good tutoring looks like. So on its own, student feedback is not enough. There needs to be a knowledgeable other involved. That knowledgeable other could be you. That knowledgeable other could be someone who works under you or with you, who's been trained in how to evaluate your staff and who is using an evaluation metric that can be consistently applied across your tutors. So it is perfectly fine if it's not you, as long as it is somebody who understands what you're going for and can rate the tutor like you would. So you could do a student survey, and then you could have the tutors do a self-reflection, and then you could go and observe the tutor in a session, and then you could meet with the tutor to talk through the process and to identify next steps for them, and strategies that they're going to try and work on, or things that they did really well. You could do all of that. You could do parts of that. But as long as it's done regularly in a consistent fashion, based on your training standards, and those results are known to the tutor, that's what we're looking for. Evaluations of the training. Yeah, so Lauren, when we are looking at evaluation, it is best practice for you to evaluate your training and your tutoring. If done well, the evaluation of your tutor is an evaluation of your training. So it gives you some idea of how training is going. So for example, if you train your tutors to do X, Y, and Z, and you only see them doing X and Y, you know there's something about Z that didn't stick, that maybe you need to go back and change something about that training. You might collect feedback from your tutors and ask them questions about how their training experience went, and you could use that to make tweaks to your training program. We won't ask you for that information, but we will ask you for an example of your evaluation of your tutors. We've talked a little bit about each of the 4 components, and I've been answering your questions as we go along. So I want to take a couple of minutes and talk about the application process. And this is the process. So you will complete an application online. There are set questions that we will ask you, and we'll also ask you to upload materials. There is a save button, so you can fill it out over time. A lot of folks do. You don't have to do it all in one sitting. When you get to the end and you've got everything good to go, you click the Save and Submit button. It takes you to the payment screen. You can pay it there, or you can print out the invoice and mail it with a check if you want. Once those 2 things are done, the payment and the application, it goes to our reviewer queue. And there is somewhat of a delay between when your application is submitted and when we get to it as a review. And I'll be honest, it's because of volume. So we get somewhere around between 200 and 300 applications a year. And we have a team of about 15 to 20 reviewers who are also working full-time in the field. So there is a little bit of a delay. We also take our time. So one of the things that I love about CRLA, another thing, is that the reviewers are not just checking boxes and passing it along. They're also providing you with feedback, like, have you thought about this? Or, you do a really great job doing this, or I've never seen it done this way, or this is a really great way of doing that, and here's why. So they do provide you with feedback, and you get that when you get your certificate. So that's really, really awesome. So Danielle is asking, do you get updates? You can always ask for updates about where your application is in the queue. I do send an email that says that we've gotten it. And that's something that I've been implementing this year because I get that question a lot. We also, in the new system, when you log into the new application system, it will tell you if your application is waiting for review. And it will also tell you whether or not we've received your payment. So you can check that on your own now too. Kelly asked, how long before certification ends do we need to submit? So Kelly, you have until the very day of your the very expiration date of your certificate to submit your renewal application. So if we have said that your application expires on July 7th, you can submit your application and payment on July 7th, and you have not done anything wrong. We do ask folks to submit it a little bit early, which is what Kendra's saying here in the chat now. So if you submit it in August for a November date, that just helps make it easier on us as a review team, because we can make sure like, oh yeah, they're not stuck in this weird limbo place waiting for us. So it just makes it a little bit easier if we do have an issue that we need to talk to you about or something we need to work out with you. It gives us time to do that. And we don't feel so pressured. So if you can submit it early, we recommend it. So one of the things that we changed about the new application is that we no longer have a separate page specifically for uploads. Now it's all part of the application. And when you go, so this is on the new application. When you go to upload, you choose your file. I'm going to upload that. Then you can just close this. When you're done uploading, simply close this. And there you go. So anything that you did on this page just stays there waiting for you. And it gives you a little pop-up to do the upload. The other thing is that if you select anything, a little pop-up will pop up that says, if you've made any you've made a change, please make sure that you save. So yeah, there's some systems in place that are, I hope, going to help keep that from happening for folks, but definitely save or type in a separate document and save. We've also added a save a draft button that you see down here in the center that will print a PDF version of your application for you to keep. That's one of the changes I was really, really big on, that we needed to have that process. So you'll be able to do that now. One of the things that we did add to the website is a sample. So if you go here to the samples tab, we have both a blank version of the application. It is not fill outable. It's just the questions listed out so you can see what we're going to ask you before you open the application. And then we also have an example from a state university who has all 3 levels. So you can go through and see how they did it. So kind of an example. We will be adding more to this as we get more information. We're also going to be adding a list of certified programs. We're just not there yet because technology always takes 12 times longer than I think it will. Okay. Oh, I'm so glad that you're excited about that, Lorianne. Okay, Kelly asked, if I start an application in May, do you need to start the new one? You do not need to start the new one, Kelly. If you have an application you started before May 26th, you can complete it. Submit it, and we will accept it. If you want to start the new one, you can. So that's a choice you can make. How quickly would you expect a program who does not need to recertify right away to adapt to the new requirements? Sarah, it depends on how closely your program currently aligns. That's why I really do encourage folks to take a look at that certification checklist in the SOAs, the Standards, Outcomes, and Assessments publication, and see where you are, because you may need to make 1 or 2 kind of superficial changes, and you may need to make larger changes. And it depends on where your program currently is. So I'd start there, and you can always email me and say, here's what I'm thinking, or here's what I'm struggling with. Folks that have been emailing with me, you know, I'm pretty good at getting back to you. How early can you submit? You could submit your renewal at any time, Deb. You have until that very last date, but you can submit early if you want to. And some folks do. We've had folks submit it a year or even a year and a half early because their program went through a revision and they want the feedback. So I only have a couple minutes left. I want to make sure that I get through everything. I do want to share with you some of the administrative stuff. So we will ask you for samples of things. So we're going to ask you for information about your selection, your tracking of hours, both of training and tutoring. We're going to ask you for an example evaluation. You should black out or white out or redact the student's last name and any ID numbers, but we do want to actually see how you are evaluating your staff. So not just the form you're using, but how you're using it. For your level, we're going to ask you for either your syllabus or your meeting agendas. So basically that big 10,000 foot view of your training program, so the sequencing. And then we're going to ask you for samples from 2 of your sessions. And then for your sample trainings, we're going to ask you for a PowerPoint for a session plan that outlines what you do in that training session, a sample assessment, so how you're doing that. And that could also be an activity. So keep in mind that assessment and activity are not 2 separate things. For example, if I ask folks in here to do a hands up, hands down, so every time you hear me say the word "the," raise your hand, that is assessing you at the same time as we're doing an activity. So those can be synonymous depending on what you choose. And then we also, instead of asking you for an annotated bibliography for your entire level, which is what we used to do, we scaled that back a little bit because we recognize that as a barrier for a lot of our new applicants. And so we're only going to ask you for your annotated bibliography for your sample sessions. So that will be 2 sessions at level 1 and 1 session at level 2, 1 session at level 3. We still encourage you to have one for your entire program. But as you're going through, you can be building that. You can build it up over time. Thank you. I'm glad everyone likes that change. So if there is a problem with your application or materials, we will reach out to you. We have a process in place for doing that. So we have a contact form our review team sends out that says, here are some things that I'm having some issues with, or I can't figure out. Because remember, there is as many different training programs as there are institutions. So my program runs in a very specific way, might be different from yours. It doesn't mean that mine is good and yours is bad. It just means they're different. So we're going to be looking at, can you clarify this for me? Or can you show me another example of this? We always are going to reach out and try to resolve the issue before we just immediately reject. We do have some applications that we reject, but it's a very small number. I would say less than 10%. So some things to avoid. Somebody asks in the KWL that we did, somebody asked, what should how much information is too much information? Most of the questions can be answered in about 200 to 400 words. If you're feeling like you're writing a book, you're probably giving us too much. But if you're just writing one sentence, it's probably not enough. So for example, one of the questions that we ask, that's one of the narrative responses, is how many tutors participate in your training at this level? You don't just want to write 10 into that question. So we want to know, and this is subtext in the question, how many attend training, how many are working toward the requirements, that sort of thing. So give us a little bit more than just one-word answers, but don't write a book. We also have a big impediment to folks is sometimes they forget to give us authentic examples. So they have a handout, they have some kind of documentation that they use. They send us a blank instead of one that's been used. We actually want to see it in use, so make sure that you give it to us in use. And then sometimes we get documentation where it's not clear how the tutor met all the requirements. So like I said before, the tutor went to 10 hours of training, but we don't know what topics they went to. Or they showed up, they signed in on a sign-in sheet, but then we don't know what they did. Now, you want to hit by a bus your proof yourself. So, you may know I only have 4 tutors and I can tell when one of them's not there and I reach out to them via email. But you still want to have some documentation on the back end so that if someone needs to step into your shoes, it's clear what they did and how they did it. this gets right to what I was just mentioning. So when one recommendation, you should implement your program before you submit your application, because you'll catch a lot of things that don't work for you just by practicing. So implement your program before submitting your application. If you have a couple of things that you're tweaking and changing over time, we expect that. You know, our programs aren't stagnant. They have to adjust to our campus, to our needs, and that's just part of this process. It's also a great idea to have someone else read your application through and make sure that your responses make sense to someone outside of the thick of it. And you can add multiple contacts to your application. You can also print your application out and give it to them. There's the print button now. Save your work often. Janet already told us, make sure you save your work often. I also encourage you to have a training timeline. And what we mean by a training timeline is, how do your tutors move through training? Because we've outlined the training topics in that specific order, but that doesn't mean you have to follow that order. So you don't have to do all the basics and then all the communication and then all the, you can do one of these and one of those and one of these and one of those. So we want to see how actually you are doing it. So have that as a piece of documentation that shows us how everything fits together. And then we also encourage you to give us, 3 to 4 months to get to your application and get through it. So if you have a specific point in time when you want to make sure that you have your approval certificate in hand, give us some time to do that. And then I always encourage folks to ask questions. If you are not yet a member of the Learn Assist listserv, absolutely join that listserv. It is hundreds of professionals in our field that do nothing but learning assistance work, and it is very active. And we have members of CRLA and even board members that follow that all the time. So Roberta is constantly saying, did you respond to this message? She's our certification director. You can also email me. Here's my email address, s.o'neill@crla.net. I also have an institutional email address, so sometimes I use that, but I prefer things to go to my CRLA. All right, so I am 2 minutes over on time. I want to be cognizant of that. I hope that you've gotten something really valuable out of the session today. Like I said, if you have questions, if you have concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I won't make you take the quiz today. I have it queued up, but I won't force you to do it. Instead, I just want to say it's been a pleasure telling you more about this. And if you have questions, feel free to stick around. I'm free for a little while after this. If you need to leave, I get it. I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up for today. If you have other questions that come up, feel free to send me an email. I usually respond within a couple of days. If you want to, I'm sure I'll see you all in some of our other sessions. There are still a couple of openings in some of the later sessions. So let me get you that link real quick. If you were trying to get into a session and you couldn't, a couple of seats opened up. So let me share that in case you all need it. Other than that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.